Greetings folks, welcome to another Friday chat here on the Green Art channel. I post these videos every single Friday, so if you have not subscribed, please do so. Let me know you're out there, and you'll get a little ding every time a new class goes live. So this week I want to talk about the Herbwise ancestors. 'Tis the season, right? And what I am hoping to cover in our little chat today is first and foremost who the ancestors are, and we're going to explore that through the three types of ancestors that I work with in my practice. And then I want to share 4 reasons why engaging with your ancestors is so important when you do any kind of plant spirit work, right? It doesn't matter how you engage, if you're a forager, a gardener, an herbalist, a green sorcerer, whatever, an admirer of flowers, it doesn't matter what your angle is, having a connection with the Herbwise ancestors is so important, and it creates really incredible waves of change and transformation through our work. So first, let's start with a little brief exploration of who the ancestors are. And in my practice, I work with 3 different types of ancestors. These categories should not be seen as dogmatic or hard and fast. Like everything in nature, the edges are very, very fuzzy, right? Everything is very blurry. There's a lot of overlap. But in my work, this really helps me because I don't live in the place where most of my blood ancestors are from, right? I'm on different land. So this delineation really helps me stay respectful and also stay engaged, right? So 3 types of ancestors that we can work with in general, but also specific to the plant spirit path. First is your ancestors of blood, of course, right? The people who made you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and how far back you want to go, and that is up to you. But I tend to think, the folks that I look like, the folks whose quirks and idiosyncrasies and facial expressions appear in my own body, right? Because when we go back a certain amount of distance, then who the ancestors are gets really blurry, right? And we start moving into our work with the Fae. So we have our ancestors of blood, our genetic ancestors, our near genetic ancestors. Then we have the ancestors of place. And this is very important for folks like myself who live on land that is not the same land where most of my blood ancestors lived, right? So these are the people who have lived on, cared for, stewarded, and been in deep relationship with the land that you are currently on since time immemorial. And we count them among our ancestors because so much of their wisdom, so much of the way that they engaged and interacted with the land is still relevant with who the land is now, right? And this is something that if you are someone who experiences the world through an animistic lens, that makes a lot of sense. But, all of us arise from the dark mystery of the land, and to that same dark mystery we all return. So wherever we are, we want to acknowledge that there are groups of people who have lived on that land since forever and have been in deep relationship with it, and we count them among our ancestors so that they receive their due respect, they receive their due honor at our various fetes and festivals, they receive their libations at our altars and shrines, and so that we are, acknowledge that whatever work we do on the land, our gardening, our harvesting, our learning, our teaching, is in the spaces of these people who very likely still inhabit those lands, right? It's very important. Third, we have our ancestors of tradition. This is a hard one for people because some folks don't feel like they're part of a tradition, right? So if you're part of a religion or a particular stream or initiatory tradition of craft or whatever, the people who came before you in that tradition, the wisdom keepers that passed on their knowledge over the ages, they are your tradition ancestors, right? And similarly, if there are teachers who have been really impactful in your life and they have passed back into the land, they are your ancestors of teachers. If you are part of a spiritual tradition or a religious tradition or even a group or collective or community that informs your spiritual practice, your traditional practices, then all of the people who have worked to pass their wisdom on down the ages. Those are your ancestors of tradition. So we have our ancestors of blood, our ancestors of land, and our ancestors of tradition. And all three of them should be honored in our work. And again, it's very fuzzy where one stops and the other begins. There can be a lot of overlap. That's totally natural. And in my work, I acknowledge and call out to them with those three delineations, but they all hold one particular spot on my altar, in my practice, and in my heart. So that's very, very important. So these are the people, of course, who came before us, who set the stage, who created a space for us to come into the world and have everything that we have in plant spirit work, in spiritual herbalism, and herbcraft, and wortcunning. These are the folks who took time to learn, explore, experiment, experience, succeed, fail, right? And hand on their ancestral empirical knowledge and wisdom to the people who came after them, who continued to refine it and add to it or subtract from it. And they handed it on, and those people refined it and added to it and subtracted from it. And so we would not have any of the things we have without them. We really ride on the backs of our ancestors, and it can seem like we're very insulated and very cut off from our dead and from the people who came before us, especially in this world of technology where everything happens so quickly. But even the most modern innovations, even things that our own grandparents could never conceptualize, are still happening because of the progress that our grandparents made, right? Without whatever they contributed, for good or bad, right? Whatever we're doing now, for good or bad, couldn't happen. And a really important meditation in this, I think, is to remember that we will all also become ancestors, right? That there will be people after us who rely on whatever we set up, whatever we created, whatever choices we made, whatever we handed down. And that is why the cultivation of wisdom and experience is so important, and the reconciliation and healing of ourselves is so important, because we want to hand off as much good as we can. That's always the goal for folks who are parents, for folks who aren't. We still leave something, in the world when we go. So the ancestors in plant spirit work are important because most of the plant lore that we have comes from ancestral lines. Like, of course, we have a ton of clinical data, in vitro, ex vitro, double-blind studies, placebos. We have all of that, but it is a tiny drop in the bucket when we compare the amount of wisdom, herbal wisdom, that we have that actually comes from folklore and from traditions and from rituals and charms and grammars and grimoires, right? All of the incredible amount of clinical data that exists around herbal medicine pales in comparison to the amount of material that we have from our ancestors. And in fact, more often than not, the clinical research that gets done around an herb is inspired by the ancestral information about that plant, right? Or the empirical evidence surrounded that plant. People generally don't do research on a plant blindly. They will say, oh, this particular group of people in this particular place have worked with this plant for this particular thing. I wonder what it is about that plant that causes these effects, right? So they're actually using the ancestral wisdom as a springboard to move into the clinical, more often than not, right? So the stories that we know about plants, the medicinal approach to working with plants, the magical approach to working with plants, the language of flowers, the doctrine of signatures, the crafting of herbal remedies, the creation of herbal magic and rituals, all of that exists because people before us chose to explore, experience, and hand it down to us. They were taught by their own ancestors, or by the plants directly, or by the guarding of the plants, or by their journeys into otherness, and they embodied that wisdom, and they worked with it, and they refined it and shined it, and then they said, this is good, right? This is good enough that I will hand this off to my children or my grandchildren or my student or my apprentice, because it's valuable, right? If it's not valuable, if it doesn't work, if it's problematic, we stop paying it forward, right? If you're grandparent has a fail-proof tea recipe that'll cure any cold, right? You get a cold, you drink this, it tastes terrible, it's going to make your stomach turn, but it'll fix you. And you spend your years growing up drinking that tea and never having it make you feel any better. You are very unlikely to make that tea for your own children, right? Or pass that recipe on. It just doesn't work anymore. So empirical evidence within the plant spirit world is very important, because the proof and the proving of the efficacy of the medicine and the magic happens by the fact that the work continues to be handed on. And if it didn't work, it wouldn't be handed on, right? It's a self-regulating system, ancestral wisdom, very powerful. So here are 4 reasons out of many why taking time to consider, contemplate, honor, acknowledge, and feed our Herbwise ancestors of blood, of land, and of tradition is so important to this work. The first is consider the sheer amount of wisdom that these people hold collectively, right? Consider how long as human animals we have been working with plants, and that wisdom all still exists, right? It doesn't die with its holder. Maybe it moves back into the crystalline structure of the land. Maybe it exists in story and fairy tale and folklore and in remedies, whatever. Imagine all of that incredible wisdom that exists in the hearts and heads and hands of our collective ancestors. When we honor them and consider them, we open ourselves up to allow that wisdom to flow into us, into this moment, right? We open the gates, we say yes. We give permission for those bits of downloads, that inspiration to come through from the worlds of otherness. Is very, very important. If you do nothing else, we do this because when you open that door, you are no longer cut off. You're no longer living in a vacuum. It's no longer about, I have to learn all of this myself, and I have to read every book, and I have to remember everything. Suddenly, you are learning as part of your ancestral collective, and you are connected to that body of wisdom that exists right in the world. It's real, right? And you will start feeling it come through. There are ways to do this. There are ritual ways to do this, very simple. There are bits of mindset. There are ways we can walk through the world. And at the end, I'm going to talk about what it looks like to engage that, right? So that's very important. So the second thing, we open the ways. When we engage with our ancestors, we are engaging with people who have moved from the realm of mystery into the human experience and then moved back into the realm of mystery. They have experienced birth, life, and death, and they have moved through the veil, through the hedge. And when we work with them, we are in effect working through the hedge, and it helps to open the ways, not just for our ancestors to work with us, but also for the plants. Yeah, the plants are rooted in the land just as we are. And so when we do ancestral work, when we work with our ancestors, honor and acknowledge, suddenly even the plants start getting louder. The deities we work with, the heroes, get louder because there's more openness, there's more permeability for them to reach through because of this work that we're doing. We're reaching through one way, they get to reach back through the other way. It's very important. Third, the acknowledgement of the way that our ancestors, blood, land, tradition, collectively hold herbal wisdom is a primary encouragement for us to engage with the bioregional plants of the land that we live on, because we start to experience the sacredness of those plants. We start to experience, through acknowledging, the previous generations of stewards of those plants, why those plants are important. And suddenly, our work with the plant becomes less exotic. It becomes less about ordering herbs off the internet, and it becomes more about the weeds that grow in our garden and in our sidewalks, and the trees that thrive where we live, and the plants that have been here since forever. And this is very, very crucial to the work, especially for folks who are approaching this from that perspective of wortcunning, right? The lore also takes on a new depth because we realize that these are not just stories in books, these are stories who were told by actual people. They were stories that someone heard and took to heart, and that story for them was transformative, it was cathartic, and it did something so that they remembered it, and it allowed them to tell that story to somebody else who had that same experience, who told it to somebody else so that you could hear it. So suddenly the lore stops becoming this kind of sterile academic thing written in a book and starts being this living blessing, this living gem that's been handed down over and over and over again into you, into this moment, right? The fourth is one that's a little bit more about accountability, and it reminds us that we are also going to be ancestors. Whatever we do with these previous three steps, hopefully we will embody and polish and refine and make relevant for the world that we live in now, and we will then hand that off to somebody. We will take what's valuable and meaningful and effective, and we will hand that off. And that makes us Herbwise ancestors, right? So we are in effect doing so much of this work in order to ensure that this work stays alive, ensure that it continues to flow, that it continues to move, that we aren't the link in the chain that breaks, right? This is very important, that we always want to acknowledge that we are part of the next wave of ancestors and that we have a job to do. We have a responsibility to our next of kin, human and otherwise. This is very important. So very, very crucial steps. So there are ways to engage with the mind, with the heart, with ritual, with honoring particular seasons and times of year. And if you're excited about that, if you want to explore the next steps of working with specifically your Herbwise ancestors, I'm going to put some information down in the details below for that kind of next level of class, right? We can only cover so much here, and this information goes very, very deep, and there's a lot of nuance and a lot of power. And just like when we are visiting a cemetery, right? We want to tread lightly. We want to move through this material with a lot of respect and a lot of gentleness and a lot of love and gratitude. So this is how we should have these conversations and how we should present this information, and that's ultimately our goal. So today is a beautiful day to spend a moment contemplating and trying to experience the line of people who exist behind you. All of the wisdom keepers, all of the people in your bloodline who have been Herbwise, because they are there, right? All of the people who have lived on the land where you now live, who were in such deep and beautiful and abiding relationships with the plants who grow where you are, to consider all of the people of the various traditions and cultures and systems and schools that you've studied, and to feel their presence behind you. To feel them in this moment being proud that somebody is remembering them, acknowledging them, and doing their best to catch all of this wisdom and to be a good receptacle for it, to honor all the work that they did and everything that they handed down, and to allow for that infinite line of Herbwise ancestors who reaches from right here, right now, this moment, who you are, back into the beginningless beginning when the plants and the humans all crawled out of the matriarchal primordial ocean, to feel their blessings flowing through you. This is the beginning of the work. So however you can work that into your practice, it can be that simple, right? To just crack the door open. With that, I will send you out with blessings during this beautiful hallowed season of peace and plenty for you, your ancestors, and for your kin to come. See you next time.